Sure, here's your translation into natural American English, following all your requirements. Hello everyone and welcome back to Twilight Stories. Today, I want to tell you about two disappearances that seemed solved until they weren't. What was found later and the reason justice could never truly be served will send chills down your spine. Before we begin, a quick note: while the events in this story aren't graphic, they still carry a haunting weight. The fear, the loss, and the kind of truth no one ever wants to believe is real. Opening music fades and deep, somber tones fill the air. It was a calm October afternoon in 1998, just like thousands of others in Chelmsford, Massachusetts. At a small car wash tucked off the main road, the kind of place people drive past without ever noticing, everything seemed ordinary. The hiss of water, the hum of machinery, the damp air, nothing out of place. No one could have guessed that within minutes, this quiet corner would become the scene of a mystery that would stretch on for decades. A young employee, bored and restless during his shift, tossed a rubber ball against the wall to pass the time. He caught it, threw it again, and again, a meaningless game that was about to change everything. One throw came a little too hard. The ball bounced off the wall, sailed over his head, and landed in the vacant lot next door. He walked over to fetch it, but then stopped. Amid the tall weeds, something pale caught his eye, to white, too smooth to be a rock or a root. He knelt down for a closer look, and realized it was a human jawbone. Within hours, police sealed off the area. Patrol cars lined the road, red and blue lights flickering across the wet windows of the car wash. Over the next 3 days, more bones were unearthed, weathered and scattered, yet still holding one chilling clue. Around the neck was a delicate silver necklace shaped like a fishbone, the kind a young woman might have worn. Investigators combed through every missing person file in Chelmsford, Lowell, even Boston, but no one matched. No mother came forward, no friend reported a disappearance. It's terrifying to think that someone could vanish from the world, and no one would even notice. Experts estimated the remains had been buried for more than 10 years. The killer, perhaps panicked, had dug a shallow grave barely 10 inches deep to hide their crime. And for all those years, the earth had kept its secret. But who was she? Why had no one searched for her? And what past had led her to such an end? Long before those bones were found, Nancy Ann Lackey Lant, the woman behind the mystery, had already become a ghost within her own life. Her childhood was a chain of wounds that never healed, a world where love was scarce and violence was the only language spoken. Her mother, Leona, was a cruel, alcoholic woman who lashed out at everyone around her. And Nancy, the middle child, was her favorite target. One night, when Nancy was just 4 years old, her leg was broken, whether by accident or rage, no one knew. But that was enough for the authorities to intervene. 3 of Leona's 4 children were removed and placed into foster care. Only Paul, the eldest, slipped through a paperwork error and remained behind. As the doors of the foster home closed, Nancy learned a hard truth. Adults weren't protectors, they were monsters who knew how to talk. She became quiet, withdrawn. She sucked her thumb until it bled, wet the bed far beyond her age, and flinched at the sound of footsteps in the hall. Then, a small miracle. In 1979, when she was 8, Nancy was adopted by the Lant family, kind, educated people from Fort Washington, Maryland. It was the first time in her life she felt safe. She loved to write, to draw, and to lose herself in music. But no matter how many years passed, the ghosts of her childhood never truly left. She lived in constant fear that one small mistake, a spilled drink, a late curfew, could make her world collapse. And yet, amid all that fear, Nancy never stopped longing for the family she had lost. She wrote letters, made calls, tried to trace them through old records, as if hope itself could stitch her broken life back together. 12 years later, Nancy had grown into a gentle, artistic young woman, but still haunted by the past. And then, in the summer of 1989, something inside her broke again. She began to rebel, not to run away, but to go back to the mother who had shattered her. Back to the past she could never truly escape. At 17, while her classmates were preparing for prom and college, Nancy was preparing for a different journey, one that would take her home without telling anyone. She quit school, packed her belongings, and left in silence. In June 1989, she was seen for the last time by her adoptive family, and then she was gone. No one knew that her trip back to Massachusetts to find the mother she hadn't seen in 14 years would be the final journey of her life, while Nancy Ann was searching for her past. For Leona, the mother she longed to reunite with, time seemed to have stood still. Leona was still the same rough, bitter, and cold woman Nancy had once fled from, only now she was older, her voice raspier, her eyes even colder. But Nancy found her anyway. Somehow, in the fall of 1989, she traced her mother to a rundown 6-unit wooden apartment building on Wilson Street in North Billerica, Massachusetts. The building stood near the train tracks, surrounded by crumbling industrial ruins and rusted smokestacks. It wasn't a home, more like a shelter for people who had long stopped believing in second chances. The walls were peeling, the floors sagged, windows moaned when the wind blew, and the neighbors never spoke. And in that gray, forgotten place, Nancy moved in with her mother, a decision that, as everyone would later agree, was a fatal mistake. There were no warm hugs, no tearful reunion like she'd imagined all those years. Between mother and daughter lay only a fragile bond of blood and shared pain, a past Nancy had spent 14 years trying to forget. At first, she tried to rebuild. She cooked, cleaned, and looked for small jobs around the neighborhood. But within weeks, the old nightmares returned. Neighbors often saw Nancy sitting on the porch, crying quietly in the cold winter air. A woman who lived downstairs later recalled, "The air in that apartment was freezing, not because of the weather, but because of the people inside." Rumors spread that the lackeys were no good, and that Nancy, the quiet girl with dreamy eyes, was slowly falling apart. She had believed finding her mother might heal something inside her. Instead, it reopened every old wound she had fought so hard to close. By December 1989, Nancy had sunk deep into despair, and when the new year came, she was gone. No goodbye, no note, no call. The girl who had spent her life searching for family had now become a ghost no one searched for. No one knew the exact day she vanished. No one remembered the last time they saw her. And Leona, her mother, didn't even blink. She never called the police. She never asked the neighbors. She never filed a missing person report. Years later, when asked about Nancy's disappearance, Leona shrugged and said coldly she probably crawled back to Maryland, with her tail between her legs. Meanwhile, in Maryland, the Lant family, her adoptive parents, were desperately searching for their missing daughter. But there was no FBI involvement, no federal task force, no media attention. Authorities simply labeled it another runaway case. And Nancy's file slowly disappeared beneath the dust of forgotten paperwork. Nearly 10 years later, her body still lay beneath the ground, just a few feet behind the Chelmsford car wash, until the day a stray ball bounced over the fence, and the truth began to rise from the soil. When detectives realized there was no matching missing person report in Massachusetts, they expanded the search nationwide. A bulletin went out describing a teenage girl, around 5'5", missing for anywhere from 5 to 20 years. At first, the search seemed hopeless until a phone call came in from Prince George's County, Maryland. An officer there remembered a girl named Nancy Ann, reported missing back in 1989, who had once lived in Massachusetts. Dental records were sent, and they matched perfectly. DNA testing later confirmed what no one wanted to believe: the remains belonged to Nancy and Lackey Lant. She had left home to find her mother, and was found buried just steps away from her own family. And detectives quickly realized this was no coincidence. The Chelmsford car wash where Nancy was buried wasn't just any place. Its manager, Richard Lackey, was Nancy's uncle. But the truth ran deeper. Richard was not only her uncle, he was also her stepfather. after a twisted and disturbing family entanglement, and Paul, Nancy's biological brother, also worked there. He had been the one to tell police that Nancy had simply run away, and he had even signed the original missing person report. Now it all made sense. Nancy had never gone far at all. Her body lay right behind the place where her family worked every day for nearly a decade. Detectives were certain this was no random killing, it was a family matter. And someone among the lackeys knew exactly what had happened. They interrogated each relative over and over for months, but no one ever broke. Then, in March 1999, hundreds of miles away in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, Richard Lackey was found dead in the bathroom of his small apartment. On the sink lay a crumpled note. In shaky handwriting, it read, "You were right, I did it, no details, no explanation, no apology." But everyone knew it was his final confession. In that family, alcohol and violence had always gone hand in hand, and this time, they had stolen the life of a young woman whose only crime was wanting to be loved. When police traced Richard's past, they found a chilling echo. In 1968, he had been convicted of manslaughter after strangling his fiancée during an argument on the way to his brother's wedding. He buried her in a shallow grave, barely 10 inches deep, in the woods. He served 8 years in prison, then walked free unchanged, unrepentant. History had repeated itself. Only this time, the victim was his own niece, his stepdaughter, his blood, and so, Nancy Ann Lackey Lant became another silent casualty in the long, cursed lineage of the Lackey family, a tragedy born not from strangers, but from those she once called her own. As the final echoes of the investigation faded, Massachusetts authorities closed the file on Nancy Ann. Richard Lackey was dead, and his brief suicide note, the words "I did it" scrawled in his handwriting, was accepted as the final confession. There would be no trial, no confrontation before a jury, and no charges for Leona or anyone else in the family over Nancy Ann's death. The story ended with a quiet period, one that many called closure, though those who loved her called it a question that would never be answered. It was a cold December morning in 1958, along the winding roads of the Columbia River Gorge in the Pacific Northwest, when a cream and red 1954 Ford Country Squire rolled east out of Portland, Oregon. Inside were Kenneth Martin, 54, his wife Barbara, 48, and their 3 daughters, Barbie, 14, Virginia, 13, and Susan, 11, a family preparing for Christmas by gathering fir and pine branches to make wreaths. They had spent the previous evening at a Christmas party and left their home in the Roseway neighborhood of Northeast Portland in warm, cheerful spirits. By Sunday, December 7th, the station wagon pulled out of the driveway early in the morning. On the way, they stopped for gas in Cascade Locks, a small town about 40 miles east of Portland, at a station run by Dean Baxter, who later remembered the courteous man who bought 5 gallons of gas before continuing east. The next sighting came in Hood River, where waitress Clara York recalled serving the family a late lunch at the Paradise Snack Bar. After their meal, they headed west again, intending to return to Portland, but they never arrived home. From that point on, the timeline grew hazy. Several motorists later claimed they saw the family on the north bank of the Columbia River in Washington state, suggesting they may have crossed the Bridge of the Gods, the toll bridge linking Cascade Locks, Oregon, to State Route 14 in Washington, or taken another crossing. But there were no toll receipts, no solid evidence to confirm such a detour. Every witness described the same ordinary scene: winter coats, laughing girls, Barbara sipping coffee, Kenneth paying the bill. Nothing out of the ordinary, nothing that hinted at tragedy. In 1958, with no cell phones and Sunday drives often lasting late into the evening, their absence didn't immediately raise alarm. Monday would come, people thought, and the Martins would surely be back. But Monday came and they didn't. Kenneth failed to show up for work, something completely out of character. Barbie was marked absent from Grant High School, and Virginia and Susan missed classes at Rose City School. By the evening of December 9th, Kenneth's boss, Taylor Eccles, called police to report the family missing. Around 11 that night, officers entered the Martins' quiet home in northeast Portland. There were no signs of struggle, no broken windows, no overturned furniture. The kitchen still held yesterday's dishes. A load of laundry sat half-finished in the washer. Their bank accounts were untouched. There were no suitcases packed, no note suggesting a long trip. Everything looked as if the family had simply stepped out for a few hours expecting to be back by dinner time, but the initial investigation was disorganized. Jurisdiction bounced between the Portland Police Department, Multnomah County, and Hood River County, and the critical first hours slipped away in confusion. The first real clue appeared back in Cascade Locks, on a gravel turnout near the riverbank. Investigators found tire tracks leading dangerously close to the edge as if a car had backed up, then driven forward. The Hood River County Sheriff offered a chilling theory. The Martins' car may have plunged off the embankment into the Columbia River below. Divers were brought in. The area was searched, but nothing was found. And from that empty silence grew a darker possibility. Perhaps this hadn't been an accident at all. In the days that followed, the search expanded along the gorge and across the riverbed. Rumors and theories spread quickly, from a tragic mishap to the work of human hands. Years later, history would add grim milestones. The bodies of Virginia and Susan were recovered from the Columbia River in early May 1959, while the family's car would not be discovered until decades later, resting deep beneath the water near Cascade Locks, offering new hope of finally testing the old theories. But in December 1958, none of that was known. Back then, all that remained were questions and the cold, indifferent current of the Columbia River. Because of all these strange details, a sense of unease began to cloud the entire case. Most people didn't notice it at first, but Detective Walter Graven of the Portland Police Bureau did. Known for his meticulous nature, his skepticism, and, as some colleagues put it, being haunted by unanswered questions, Graven couldn't shake the feeling that the Martins' disappearance wasn't an accident. He believed something deeper, darker, was hidden beneath the cold waters of the Columbia River. And he was right, because only a few days after the Martin family vanished, a white 1951 Chevrolet reported stolen was found abandoned near Cascade Locks, not far from where the family had last been seen. At first, police treated it as an unrelated incident. The car didn't match the Martins' 1954 Ford Country Squire, and there was no reason to connect the two. But when they opened the trunk, what they found made everyone's blood run cold. A .38 caliber Colt Special revolver, covered in dried blood, tossed into nearby brush. The serial number traced back to Meyer and Frank, a large department store chain in downtown Portland. And ironically, 2 years earlier, Donald Martin, the eldest son of Kenneth and Barbara, had worked at that very store. Donald had been accused of stealing more than $2,000 worth of sporting goods, including a revolver identical to the one recovered near the abandoned Chevy. Yet, for reasons still unclear, the gun was never tested for fingerprints or blood type. Investigators dismissed it as secondary evidence and allowed the man who had found it to keep it. Years later, when the man's widow showed the weapon to reporters, she said quietly, "It looked like it had been used to beat something, not just to shoot." By then, however, any potential evidence had been destroyed. The most crucial clue, the one that might have solved the case, was lost forever. As the investigation widened, Graven turned his focus to Donald, the estranged son. He contacted him by phone. Donald answered from New York, where he was serving in the U.S. Navy. His voice was polite, calm, but it carried none of the grief one might expect from a man whose entire family had just vanished. Still, with thousands of miles between them and no physical evidence linking him to the scene, Donald was ruled out as a suspect. On December 8th, just 1 day after the Martins disappeared, police arrested 2 ex-convicts, Roy Light and another man whose name was never released, for stealing that same Chevy. A waiter at the Paradise Snack Bar later testified that he had seen both men eating lunch at the same time as the Martin family. The men left shortly after the Martins stood up, heading in the same direction. This raised a chilling possibility. Had the family been followed, ambushed? But after an extended investigation, authorities concluded the two men had no connection to the disappearance. Once again, the trail went cold. By early 1959, the case had drifted from tragedy into legend, a ghost story whispered along the Columbia Gorge. The Martins had left no note, no evidence, no trace, only a scattered trail of puzzling clues that led nowhere. Theories multiplied like wildfire. A tragic accident, a kidnapping, even a cover-up, but none held firm ground. Then, on May 1, 1959, 5 months after the disappearance, the Columbia River finally stirred. A drilling rig operating near the Dalles, Oregon, felt its anchor catch on something heavy deep below. The object resisted, then slipped free, disappearing back into the dark. The next morning, a couple fishing near Cascade Locks spotted two objects bobbing gently on the water's surface. As they drew closer, the river quietly returned its secret. On May 3, the first body washed ashore on the north bank near Camas, Washington, about 70 miles west of the Dalles. It was Susan Martin, the youngest daughter. The next morning, Virginia, the middle child, was found near Bonneville Dam. Both were identified through dental records. The news shocked Portland. Two of the missing Martin girls had finally been found, but their parents and eldest sister, Barbie, were still nowhere to be seen. Autopsies determined the cause of death to be drowning. Yet several details didn't add up. One technician claimed to have seen small puncture marks on a skull, possibly bullet holes. The medical examiner disagreed, calling them damage from decomposition. Still, the strangest clue came from the metallic traces, particularly aluminum, found on Susan's clothing. The spot where the drilling rig had snagged something heavy was directly across from an aluminum smelting plant. A new theory emerged. The rig may have struck the submerged car, shattering a window and releasing the girls' bodies into the current. If that was true, the vehicle might still be resting somewhere beneath the riverbed. But repeated searches using sonar, divers, even helicopters found nothing. One diver nearly drowned during the operation, forcing officials to halt the mission. 2 bodies were buried. 3 family members and their car remained missing. Many accepted that the case was closed, but Walter Graven never did. He was consumed by the belief that the Martins had been murdered, that someone had forced their car off the road, and that the 1954 Ford held the truth. Yet the car was never found. When Graven died in 1988, he carried that obsession with him to the grave. For decades afterward, the Columbia River kept its secret, buried beneath layers of silt and time, its waters cold and still. No new investigation, no reopened case, only silence. Until late 2024, when a man named Archer Mayo, an amateur diver, announced he hadn't given up. Archer wasn't a detective, nor a journalist. He was simply a man who believed the story deserved an ending, and that, somewhere beneath the river's depths, a car was still waiting to be found, armed with modern dive gear, high-frequency sonar, and a stubborn streak of curiosity that bordered on obsession. Archer Mayo began a journey of his own. No funding, no investigative team, only a belief that the truth still slept somewhere beneath the waters of the Columbia River. He focused his search around Cascade Locks, the very place where, back in 1958, the mysterious tire tracks had first been found. For months, Archer patiently mapped every inch of the riverbed, recording every fissure, every hollow, every scar left by time. Then one day, amid the tangled lines of a sonar map, a shadow appeared, a depression nearly 20 feet deep, isolated in the middle of the channel. And somehow, he knew. This was it. Night had already fallen. The sun slipped behind the Cascade Mountains, leaving only the soft churn of the current. Archer marked the coordinates, surfaced, and headed home in silence, determined to return at dawn. The next morning, As the first light broke over the gorge, he descended again. At 60 feet down, his beam caught something metallic half buried beneath rock, silt, and 6 decades of silence. A twisted outline began to take shape, the curved roofline of a vintage 1950 Ford. The rear axle was snapped, the hood caved in, the engine block wedged sideways under stone. There was no doubt anymore he had found the Martin's car. On March 6, 2025, recovery crews launched a full-scale operation. Divers and rescue teams worked for hours, hoisting fragments of the wreck from the depths. By the following day, they had pulled up the chassis, engine, and rear assembly just enough to confirm the make and paint scheme. It was unmistakable, a 1954 Ford Country Squire, two-tone red and cream, perfectly matching the description from the original case files. Though much of the vehicle remained trapped under stone, forensic experts said they were 99% certain this was the Martin's car. After 65 years, the Columbia River's vow of silence had finally been broken. When the wreck breached the surface, everyone held their breath. Would they find the remains of Kenneth Barbara or Barbie Martin inside? The answer came swiftly and painfully. There were no human remains. The car was sealed, transported to a secure facility, and turned over to forensic analysts. As of March 2025, no final conclusion had been reached. No one could yet explain how or why the Martin's car ended up in the river that night. Maybe it was a tragic accident, swallowed by fog and the icy dark of a December drive. Or perhaps, as Detective Walter Graven had always believed, a human hand had steered them over the edge. The answer, it seems, has drifted away, carried downstream with time itself. The narration slows. The music fades to a single, somber piano line. If you've stayed with us to the end, thank you for walking through one of America's coldest and most haunting mysteries. You can listen to the full audio version of this story anywhere you get your podcasts. And if you know of a case or a mystery you think deserves to be told, send it to us through the link in the description below. Thank you for supporting Twilight Stories. And remember, sometimes the truth isn't buried in the ground. Sometimes it rests quietly beneath the water, waiting for someone patient enough to find it.